Hey guys, so got a really good Q&A for this month or this week or however often we do them, and it was on mobility and flexibility training, and how important is mobility for the powerlifter, the bodybuilder, or just the casual gym rat. So what we're going to talk about today is mobility. So kind of small the way I wrote that, and make it a little bigger. So mobility is the topic. And we're going to talk about all the things that are encompassed in mobility, why it's important, what it means, and what we can take home from that as lifters. So first off, let's just get on the same page. Mobility is the ability to be mobile, which just means to move through a given range of motion or set of movement patterns. And let's just first set the record straight that mobility is going to be different for everybody and what they need. The mobility that an Olympic lifter needs is going to be different than that of a power lifter. The mobility of a gymnast is going to be a lot different than that of a bodybuilder, and all kinds of different permutations you can imagine. So the first thing is be as mobile as needed. Okay? So, as needed meaning you don't need to be a yogi if you are a bodybuilder. You need to be able to go to a full range of motion on all the barbell and dumbbell movements and machine movements that you may use in your training safely and without pain. Okay? If you're an Olympic lifter, that may mean that you need to be able to do a full depth overhead squat in a clean position. So it's going to be a different story for each person. We don't want arbitrary mobility or arbitrary flexibility, meaning that we don't need you to be able to get into all these kind of contortionist positions to be a safe and effective lifter. In fact, an immobile joint that is really strong is at risk, just the same way that a highly flexible joint that isn't very stable is at risk. Okay? That's why you see sometimes different injuries in men and women, because they're kind of on a different spectrum of scale there. So, we want to be as mobile as needed. Okay? And how do we accomplish that? Well, the first thing we need to do is figure out how mobile are we. A few things that I think are really important for lifters is to be able to get a full range of motion squat, meaning I'd like to see you be able to get your hips below your knee joint. I also like to make sure, so let's go, we want to be able to do a full wrong squat. Okay? I also would like to be able to see you do a conventional deadlift with your back arched, lower back in extension. Okay? If it rounds at the bottom, that's going to be an issue. I want to be able to see a shoulder press, dumbbell or barbell, full range of motion. So overhead press, full range of motion without elevation, meaning that you're not actually doing this to get your press over your head. Okay, you don't elevate. You actually have full scapular mobility, full flexion in the shoulder. Okay, so that's without shrug. Okay, so we have an overhead press. We have a conventional dead. We have a squat. And I would also like to be able to see a bent row at parallel, meaning this bent row, not this bent row with flat back. Okay? So it's going to require some mobility at the ankle, the hips, and the T-spine and at the shoulder joint. Okay? To get there, we have a number of tools at our disposal. Okay? We have what's called self-myofascial release, which basically means self-sports massage to try to get pliability and release in tissues. You guys who are in the gyms in the States, you're going to see there's been a massive amount of foam rollers that have been coming into place. You don't have to use a foam roller. You can use a tennis ball. You can use a racket ball. You can use different variations of foam rollers, like rumble rollers. You can use like the stick. There's a lot of different ways to do self-myofascial release, which is just a complicated way of saying getting release in soft tissue. Okay? So Our muscles, they're encased in what's called fascia. Like if you took a raw chicken breast and you just cut it just slightly, you'd see it kind of open like that. That little thin sheath around it is our fascia, and that comes seamlessly into our tendons. And fascia and tendon is a it can change its rigidity, and muscle tissue can change its rigidity. It kind of warps down and creates more rigidity. We want rigidity when we need it, when we're trying to lift, but we also want to be pliable. We want to turn that on when we need it. So if we're so rigid and so mobile that we can't get full range of motion without pain, that's when you want to bring out the foam roller. So essentially, great tool, because it's both a diagnostic and a treatment. You can foam roll a muscle group until you find that it may have a knot or a tight area, and then once you find it, you can sit with it, rock back and forth, give it at least 30 seconds, move slowly, and until you start to feel a slight release, then you can move on. So I would say if you're new to foam rolling, start with an easy, just plain white one. Roll over most of your major muscle groups. Pay special attention to like lateral hip, glute, quad, hamstring, calf, pec. A lot of the areas, lat, that we tend to be tight as bodybuilders and lifters in general. And search the area for a tight spot, and you'll find that you tend to have chronic areas that tend to develop this tightness. Okay, so you can hit your hot spots, and then from there, after you started with SMR, then you can start going into mobility drills. Okay? So that's going to be dynamic movements that are getting us ready to lift weights. Okay? This can be accomplished through warm-up sets. This can be accomplished through movements that look a lot like your weights. I do a lot of overhead squats with a dowel. I do lateral lunges. Many things you can do. So basically this is getting some synovial fluid going in the joints, getting all that soft tissue and fascia to get moving, and getting us ready to be moving with heavier loads, so we're nice and pliable. Some great examples you can see on like Bryce Lewis's videos, or the Mobility WOD, Kelly Starrett's, his channel. There are plenty of examples. It can be everything from lunge patterns to squat patterns to seated wall slides. It's kind of beyond the scope of this video for me to go over every single mobility drill, but essentially they are moving, full range of motion, light body weight, rhythmic patterns where you're trying to get joint motion and lubrication and flexibility and mobility all in the same kind of thing. But it's not sitting there just holding a static stretch. Okay? A good general rule is you want to be mobile before you train, and you can work on your flexibility afterwards. Okay? So we're going to do our SMR, we're going to do our mobility, and then we're going to move on to, and I'll bring the cameras to connect to see what the hell I'm writing later. SMR, mobility, and we're going to move into our warm-up sets. Okay? Now, for some people, there may be a reason to do some static stretching before you actually train. In general, you don't want to make a muscle super stretched and relaxed right before you start working out. But if, let's say you have really tight calves, okay, to the point where you can't hit depth very well, and it makes your butt tuck under, your knees track improperly, all kinds of things, you're turning your feet out, you can't get there. If that's the issue, the contribution of force to a squat that the calf has is so minor that it might be worth actually stretching it right before you squat, especially if it means that you're going to have less of a chance of injury. I mean, it's not like the calf raised portion is putting much into a squat. So sometimes there's definitely a reason to work on static stretching and direct flexibility work if it's required for the lifter to get the range of motion. And then you just start going into your warm-up sets and you get yourself ready to move anyway. So you get ready to move before you do your sets. That's the main rule, is if you just don't want to go directly from a stretch into then let's work. Okay? So mobile before you train, and that just means that the last thing you want to do is a mobility drill or warm-up set before you lift. And then afterwards, that's the time to actually do some more dedicated static stretching. Okay? A few other tools you guys have probably seen, bands. Okay? How do these bands work? What the heck are these bands all about? Well, bands, I think you have to look at them as a very interesting, usable resource, but if you don't know what you're doing with them, you're just going to be kind of wasting your time. I think the main thing that bands benefit you to be able to do is you can do contract, relax, stretching with them. This is called in in complicated terms, PNF stretching, proprio neural facilitation, but that's a really complex way of saying it. If you contract an agonist and antagonist group and then relax it afterwards, you're going to get a greater range of motion. So you've probably seen the classic one's the hamstring stretch, where you'll have a trainer with the client on the ground stretching the hamstring, and then they'll have them, okay, contract against me, now relax, and you can get a little more range of motion. Because that hamstring is contracting, it's turning off all the inhibition stuff, so then you can get a little more stretch into it, okay? If you don't have a partner, you can do the same thing with bands. You can pull your hamstring down and use the tension of the band to bring you into where you need to be. So a great one, for example, is I'll lie on my back, and I'll work on internal rotation in this hand. I've got the band looped around my foot, and I'm like gas pedaling to pull myself into the stretch. Then I'm externally rotating to get the contraction, and I'm gas pedaling a little further down to get myself back in. So it's a great way to do contract, relax, stretching, okay? All right? Another awesome thing you can do with bands is if you have a really, really tight joint, typically in the hip, like sometimes I feel like my hip is just jammed up into the socket, I can do a hip stretch, but have the band pulling me that way to kind of get my femur a little bit out of the acetabulum. You know, get my kind of my hip joint a little more released so I can get a little more range of motion and mobility in that joint. So you can change the joint tightness a little bit acutely while stretching. And another great example would be, well, kind of a little bit of both, is you have the band in your hand connected to something here, and you're trying to get more shoulder flexibility, like you're trying to be able to do that. So you pull down, so you're doing contract, and you let it pull into you to stretch, and at the same time it's also pulling the humerus just up and out, so you're getting a little more joint laxity while you're doing your mobility work. So it's kind of both at the same time there, okay? Another thing you can use bands for is neuromuscular re-education or reactive neuromuscular training. It's a really complicated way of saying making a, what's the best way to put it? Making a postural deviation or a movement compensation more obvious to your body. Like, for example, if I squat and I have this forward lean every time I do it, I'm not correcting it because I'm not very aware of it, or I can't consciously stop myself from doing it. So what you can do, you take that band, you loop it around a pole in front of you or something like that, throw it one loop over each shoulder, go into a prisoner squat position, back up so there's some tension on the band, so it's pulling you the way you're already leaning, and you do a squat. Now it's pulling you so hard that you would actually lose your balance. So now it's actually on your radar. Now you can get all those posterior muscles to contract, keep you in the right alignment, and now all the stuff that should have been preventing you from doing a normal forward lean is aware of the problem because it's been made more severe by the band. Right? Then you can take it off and you notice your squat pattern is improved. So basically the general rule there for reactive neuromuscular training, RNT if you will, is use the bands to pull you into the compensation. Take a video of your squat, see what the heck is wrong with it, make it worse with bands, unloaded of course, and you'll become then aware of it, contract against it, and be able to move through the range of motion properly. And you can use that as a part of your warm-up right here in that mobility drill section before you go ahead and do your actual sets. Okay? So that's basically, you can use bands, foam rollers, mobility drills, and a combination thereof. You can do mobility drills with the band kind of pulling you. You can do all kinds of stuff to get ready to be able to meet these 5 criteria. Okay? So let's bring it in and recap because this pen's dying, you're too far away. I've been blabbing, I'm all over the place. Let's get a little more kind of on track. So, mobility. What we want as bodybuilders and weightlifters, we want to be as mobile as needed. We don't need to be a yogi, we need to be a weightlifter. Full range of motion squat, great goal. Conventional deadlift without having a flex spine at the bottom. An overhead press, full range of motion without shrugging. And I would love to see a bent over row at parallel with a flat back. Okay? So some of our tools to do this on a regular basis. To get ready for our sets, we can do some foam rolling or self-myofascial release, both as a diagnostic and as a tool to find those spots and release them. Then we can get into our mobility drills, which are basically mimicking the movements we're going to do in our training through a full range of motion, unloaded with body weight in a repetitive fashion, trying to get that joint to get mobile, release some synovial fluid, and get you ready for the movement pattern.
and then we can actually start getting into our warm-up sets. When you do after your workout, you can just replace the mobility with straight up flexibility work. That could be static stretching. And for those of you who have a really specific issue as far as static flexibility with an individual joint, you can throw that in right there or right there. You can start doing like the great one is the calf example I used. If you have really super inflexible ankles to the point where it messes up your squat, yeah, you do want to stretch your calves before you squat. Okay? Some people will need to do that. Just make sure that you get some warm-ups or mobility drill in afterwards so that you're ready to move. Okay? So we've got our SMR, we've got all kinds of stuff. We also have bands. And there's 3 things we can do with bands. Well, there's more things you can do with bands, but the main things you can do: contract, relax stretching. For example, using your own hamstring stretch, and you do a hamstring curl or hip extension against the band and use the band to pull you back, trying to get a little farther each time you do it. You can do that lat stretch I was showing you, where I have the band attached up and behind me. It's in my hands, and I do like a lat push down and let it pull me back into shoulder flexion to try to get full range of motion overhead with my arms. You can use it to kind of pull a joint out of a slightly impinged position, like if you're doing some hip stretches and you've got the band laterally pulling your hip out of its socket a little bit, just to kind of help you get that joint mobile. And you can also do reactive neuromuscular training, or neuromuscular retraining, which is basically pulling yourself into the compensation that you are seeing so that you can get the opposing muscle groups that are supposed to be fixing that more aware of the problem and doing it. Okay? So, mobility. That's what's up. And I know that was a way long video, but I got going and I went with it. So hopefully that helps you guys out. You have some tools at your disposal. And I would also advise checking out Bryce Lewis's blog or vlog or YouTube channel, whatever the hell they call it these days. You kids are crazy. And see what he's doing, because he's doing a lot of good stuff that makes sense, and he's moving some heavy weights. And I would also check out Kelly Starrett's Mobility Watt. Good stuff. All right, this is 3DMJ signing out. Talk to you later.